Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome to Little Mountain Ranch and to my kitchen, where we are going to do a big food prep day for a busy week that we have coming up. It's a little bit later than I normally like to get started. It's around 9:20 right now. I usually like starting this much earlier in the day so that it can be done by around 10 a.m. All the food prepared, done, and just basically cooking on the stove or in the roaster oven or the slow cooker or whatever I'm using. But today got a little bit of a later start, so we'll probably be done around 11 or so. I have talked about these magazines before because I love them, and I have such nostalgic feelings towards especially Backwoods Home Magazine, because I used to take this out of the library back before I could afford a monthly subscription to magazines and learn all about how to do so many of the things that I know how to do now here on my homestead. So a huge thank you to Backwoods Home Magazine and Self-Reliance Magazine for partnering with me for today's video. So I do have a link down below for 50% off of a monthly subscription to both of these magazines, and I can recommend them both equally. I think they're fantastic. I did have an article in the most recent Self-Reliance magazine, which really felt so full circle to me, that I started out taking these out from the library, and now I have an article published in them, and it just thrills me to no end. This is a family-owned business, and I absolutely love supporting family businesses, and they have been around for a long time. They have the second generation of their family is now running the business, and I just love that even more. Businesses that get passed on to family members is just such a wonderful thing. So if you are interested in a really high value, kind of old school magazine, I highly recommend either of these publications, Backwoods Home Magazine or Self-Reliance Magazine. Today's video is going to be a little bit more recipe inspiration than an exact how-to to do all these recipes, because if you've been here for a while, you know that I am more a little bit of this, a little bit of that kind of cook. I tend to use what I have available to modify recipes if I don't have the exact ingredients for a recipe. So this is all about inspiration in today's video. Most of today's recipes, however, can be found in the Little Mountain Ranch Family Cookbook. I do have a digital version and a hard copy version available if you don't already own it. And I also have quite a few of these recipes over on my blog, so I'll make sure that I link those down in the show notes for you and in the pinned comment. I've already done quite a bit of just prep and organization in anticipation of this big cooking morning that we're going to do this morning. And this is something that I do. I find it way less stressful than doing one recipe at a time and trying to stop and run and find the ingredients all over the place, because I have ingredients in my root cellar, down in my pantry, in my freezers, all of that. So I like to get all of the ingredients I need for all the recipes that I'm going to make together all at once. So I've already been down to the pantry and collected up all of the canned goods that we need for today's recipes. I've been to the freezer. I have started a couple of other things that I'm going to have going on in the background of the main recipes that we're going to make today. So I have some kombucha that I have started for another batch of kombucha over on the counter. That is tea bags. I have 6 tea bags in there, a cup of sugar, and then I have it steeping with some boiling water. And that'll be something that we'll get to a little bit later. I also have some yogurt, or some milk, what will be yogurt, pasteurizing in my Instapot. And I'll be turning that into some yogurt as well for later on this week. What else do we have going on here? I think that's about it. The rest of it I wanted to do here with you. I'm going to start with making some pie crust, because I want to make a couple of apple pies using some of my canned apple pie filling from the pantry, and pie crust needs to chill in the fridge. So one of the other things that I do when I'm planning out a day like this, a cooking day like this, is I go through all my recipes and I determine kind of if there's something that needs to be chilled, I might start that right away. If there's something that needs to be like fried, some fried meat or something like that, I might start all of that first, so that when I'm finished doing the other recipes, whatever I need, in this case pie crust, will be ready for me to make the pies, and then I can just clean up the kitchen and be done with it. So we are going to start with some pie, making some pie crust, and I use the tender flake pie crust recipe, which you can find online. This is the recipe my mom always used, and it almost always works. Not always, but that has to do with the baker, not with the recipe itself. Pie crusts are one of those things that are kind of hit or miss with me, but Usually you want to start with some kind of fat. That is what is going to give you a nice light flaky pie crust. And I am going to be using a pound of butter. This is actually going to make enough pie crusts for, I think, around 3 pies. I'm only gonna make 2 today, but pie crust freezes really well, so the rest will just go into the freezer. I'm gonna chop this up into some cubes. So this actually, butter just came out of the freezer, so it's nice and cold, which is what you want for pie crusts. I have my beef, both my stew beef and my ground beef that I'm going to be using to make chili and beef stew today, sitting in the sink with hot water. And while I'm making this, I'm actually just gonna get that meat frying on the stove over there so that when I'm done the crust, I can move on to the next stages of those 2 recipes. So I'm going to be using my roaster oven to make my beef stew. I'm gonna be making a large batch of beef stew. Hopefully that will provide us with 2 meals. And then the large pot over there for the chili. I know that it can be a little bit difficult to follow along with the specific recipes when I'm cooking like this on the channel, but the reason that I do it is because this is a way that I find is really productive to get a lot done in the kitchen, and I want to show you each step of how I do that rather than showing each recipe on its own. That's one of the reasons why I have them over on my blog, why I wrote the cookbook, all of that, so that you can have the recipes if you want to actually recreate these in your own kitchen. But I have heard a lot of feedback over the years that it's really helpful to see how I do this, what my method is for this kind of big cooking day. So that's why I do it this way. So I'm just gonna bring my liner over here. My stew beef right into here. And fortunately for me, our butcher's really good at trimming stew beef and making sure that it is nice sizes, so I don't usually need to trim it. If you don't have a butcher that is good, as good at that as mine is, then make sure that you do trim off the extra fat, the extra gristle, and also to put it into the size that you want for your beef stew. You know, I almost think that I could have grabbed my larger roaster oven, as this one is a little small once we add all the other things into it. I think we're gonna run out of space here. We want to turn this up fairly high so that it fries the meat rather than just kind of steams it, so that we get that nice dark brown coating on the meat, which just makes beef stew taste so much better. And we're gonna do the same thing here with our ground beef. And this is for our chili. I'm using 3 pounds of ground beef for the chili. So most of my recipes are enough for the average family to have 2 good sized meals. And if you don't want to eat the same thing back to back, you can always freeze. Most of my recipes also freeze really well. You can also freeze them and pull them out when you need a quick meal. Okay, over onto the stove. So what is really awesome about all these recipes that we are going to do right now, actually excluding the pie crust, are primarily food that I put up last summer from both my garden and from other farms and markets in my area. The only recipe that really doesn't have a lot of homegrown stuff in it is this pie that we're gonna make. The filling does. The filling is apples that we grew here on the property that I canned last fall. But not the flour and the butter. I buy my flour from a place called True Grain here in British Columbia, and it's actually BC grown organic wheat. And I buy it usually in 10 25-pound bags at a time. And it is white flour, so it tends to store for 6 to 12 months in my cold room. I kind of have ideal conditions down there in my cold room for storing flour longer term. Okay, so we have that. I have my pastry cutter here. We're going to add 5.5 cups of flour to this. I have the heat on fairly high on both of these so that any of the water that's left over that was from soaking in the sink evaporates off really quickly, and again doesn't kind of steam the meat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a bit. So now we're going to add 2 teaspoons of salt, You can actually do this with your fingers and kind of pinch the butter to mix it into your flour, but the pastry cutter is faster than doing it that way. I have a friend who makes the most amazing pies, and she does it by hand like that, pinching them. I think she calls it lamination, to laminate the flour and the butter or the fat together, but I don't have that kind of patience. Probably why my pies don't turn out great every time. Okay, so we need 1 egg, just a little bit mixed up here. We're going to add a teaspoon of vinegar to our egg. Oops, a little bit more than a teaspoon. I'm gonna mix that together. And then we're gonna top this off with water. Now we're going to take our egg, water, and vinegar mixture and drizzle it over the top. And I always have a little bit of extra water standing by in case my pastry dough doesn't have quite enough moisture in it to come together. So the biggest thing with a pie crust is making sure that you don't overwork your dough, because then you end up with a tough pie crust. And with your pie crust, you're still going to be able to see chunks of butter in that. You also want that. Oh, pie making is so messy. Not my favorite thing to do. Oh. So I'm going to divide this into 4. And then I'm just going to take my pie crusts here, form them into a disc, and then they are going to go into the fridge until we're ready to make our pies, so they're nice and chilled. Into the fridge. My roaster oven over there just bit the dust, and I knew it was on its way out because it just wasn't heat regulating properly, but now it's completely not working. Fortunately, I have a second one that I have to go down and grab to get this beef stew going. Going to put together 3 loaves of bread as well. Bread is always a good extra filler with things like chili and beef stew and stuff like that. So the recipe is on page 88, and this bread recipe, I've heard such good feedback from other people who have tried it. It is super easy to make. If you have never made bread before, you'll be able to do this one. So we're gonna add 4 cups of warmish water to our pan. One sec, gotta give this a stir. If you wanna grab a pen and paper, I will run you through the exact measurements for this recipe. So you're gonna need 1 quart or 4 cups of water, a tablespoon of yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt, a 1/4 cup of honey or sugar or other sweetener of your choice. You do want some type of something that's going to feed your yeast. So honey or sugar is what I recommend. A 1/4 cup of olive oil and 6 to 8 cups of flour. Sometimes you need to adjust the amount of flour because so many things influence the moisture in a product. Even just the level of humidity in your house can make a difference. So that's why there's kind of a 6 to 8 amount or cups of flour that you need to add to this. So we're going to add our yeast to this. I'm going to add a little bit of cane sugar to this. Now at this point you can, that's not the right lid. At this point you can opt to allow your yeast to activate. So that means just to let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes to let it start getting bubbly. I know that my yeast is good. The biggest reason you want to do that is so that you can tell whether you have active yeast or not, but I know this yeast is good. I just made bread yesterday, so I am not going to bother with that. I have my milk that I just pasteurized in my Instant Pot, just going into some cold water in the sink to cool it down quickly, and then we're going to put our yogurt together. Now we're going to add our olive oil, a couple of cups of flour, and then we're going to turn this on for 8 minutes. And then once it starts mixing, I'll add my salt. My whole idea of frying my meat in my roaster oven, the roaster oven situation just not working out for me today. It's not working because the way that a roaster oven works is it heats up around the whole thing and it starts burning along the edge where there isn't any liquid. It really is designed to be kind of filled up entirely and then have a lid on it so that it doesn't burn like that. So I guess I'm not going to have fried meat. I could take my meat and fry it on the stove and then put it in there, but to be honest, those kinds of things do improve flavor and color of meals, but sometimes when you're doing just bulk cooking like this, it's better just to get it done and have it taste good. Maybe not excellent or restaurant level, but good, and just get it done than it is to get too finicky with things. So I'm actually just going to add all my ingredients to that. This is going to be slow cooking. I might even leave it on until tomorrow morning, so it'll give a lot of opportunity for that meat to become really tender and cooked all the way through. So that's my plan with that. Generally when you're making bread, if you're using a mixer, kind of a standard KitchenAid or a Bosch, you want to knead it for kind of 4 to 5 minutes because it does do a much more efficient job than hand kneading. Normally with hand kneading, you want 6 to 8 minutes of hand kneading. I find that the Ankerstrom mixer tends to work more like my hands would. And so I do it for the full 8 minutes, and it does have a timer on it, which I love. So I'm gonna let that knead, and then as soon as it's done, I'll take out the mixers, throw the lid on, and then we'll let that rise for an hour. And while that's happening, we're gonna put together the rest of our recipes. We're gonna turn the stove back on here with our ground beef, and now we're going to put together our canned chili starter, which already has the tomatoes and all the seasonings, onions, all of that in here. And canned corn. We also have canned kidney beans. So with the kidney beans and the corn, I will rinse them off in a colander in the sink. And but with the chili sauce, we're going to just dump it straight into our beef. Okay, I have rustically chopped up. I had a chef come and spend Christmas with us one year, and he told me that this style of chopping is called rustic chopping, which I liked. So I rustically chopped up carrots, onions, garlic, and potatoes, and I'm just going to throw all of that right in to our roaster oven with our meat. We're going to add some bay leaves to this. We'll add 4. We're going to add some parsley. So this is all parsley that I freeze-dried from last year's garden. So we'll add some parsley. I'm going to add some kale. So this is freeze-dried kale that I did last year, so we add this to soup, stew, smoothies, mostly smoothies, but I remembered that I had it on the top of the fridge right now, so I'm going to add some to our stew. I'm going to rinse off some corn and add a quart of corn. And the purpose of that is just to remove some of the extra starches, because corn can be pretty starchy. And friends, I'm going to add tomato juice. So I did a little bit of a pantry tour talking about some of the things that I loved that I canned from last year and some of the things I wasn't going to be canning again. You can check out that video if you'd like. And one of the things I was talking about was that I had canned tomato juice from all my tomato processing last year, and I hadn't used any of it. I keep forgetting it's there because it's not something I have kind of incorporated into my thinking around my cooking. I just haven't used it. And because of that video, I remembered I had it down there, so I'm going to be adding that as the base for this stew. I am going to have to grab many more. I just added 2 to that. That was nowhere near enough, so I'm going to go grab 4 more, and then I'll top the rest off with water. I'm going to add a couple of sage leaves to this as well. So this is also sage from last year's garden. So as you can see, this beef stew is all stuff from last year's garden. So we have the potatoes and the carrots, which came out of the root cellar. We have the dehydrated herbs and kale that came from the garden. We have beef that came from our farm. The only thing that didn't actually are the bay leaves, the garlic, and the onions. Oh no, actually the garlic did. That was the garlic that I pulled out of the garden when we were out there together a couple days ago. But the onions are not. I planted so many onions this year, so hopefully I'll have enough to last the entire year so that I don't have to buy onions at the store again. But for the most part, this is all from the farm, which feels pretty darn good. So we'll just give this a mix here. I'll pop the lid on. I still have to run down and grab more tomato juice, but we can let that cook a little bit in the meantime. And then over here, we're going to put together our chili. Love when things start moving in the kitchen, when the food prep part's done and I get to just assemble everything. So now we're going to add our delicious chili base. This is one product that I have loved having on the shelves so much. So I even have peppers in there as well, but I have extra peppers. I grew a ton of peppers last year and my freezer is so full of them. So I'm going to add some peppers to this. We're going to add our rinsed beans and corn. I just chop and freeze my peppers in little Ziploc bags like this. I'm gonna throw that in there. Now, once this starts cooking and all the flavors start melding, I will, I'll come back and taste it and then decide if I have to add any extra seasonings to it or anything like that. But this is gonna make a gorgeous chili. Oh, it already smells so good. I'm also going to need to grab a couple more jars of the chili base because I'm making so much here, which is great because all the extra will just go into the freezer for busy days. Okay, 2 more jars of chili base. All this has to do is simmer so all the flavors can meld. Because everything's cooked in there, we could just heat it up and eat it right away, but I'm gonna let it simmer for a little bit and let those flavors really meld and deepen. And we're gonna throw these other 3 jars of juice into our beef stew over here, and then those 2 meals are done. And that beef stew will probably last us for 3 meals. I'm kind of glad that it worked out that I ended up with the larger one because I certainly fried up enough meat to make a really large batch of beef stew. And then we have the chili here, which is going to be good for 2 meals. So that's 5 meals down. I'm going to add a little bit of Worcestershire sauce to this as well because I love the flavor of Worcestershire sauce. And salt and pepper too. I do have the recipe for the pulled pork that we're gonna make either on my blog or in the cookbook. I can't remember if it's in the cookbook or not. But basically you just want to take some, like a shoulder roast and roast it slow, shred it, or in this case, you can can it. I've shown this on my channel many times before on how to can pork. So I'm going to take my canned pork, I'm going to drain out some of the juice from it, and then we are going to add some canned barbecue sauce. This is the rhubarb barbecue sauce that we made, when did we make this? About 2 months ago. So we're going to use that. So we're going to go drain out some of our juice. And usually when I have meat juices, I'll drain them into a jar or I'll just put it straight into my dog's food dishes because they love it. And then we're going to take this, and I prefer to use wooden utensils when I am working with my glass jars so that I don't scrape the insides of them and then just get little micro scrapes happening that can cause my jars to wear down over time and then eventually crack. So wood is preferred. We're going to add our barbecue sauce, and this barbecue sauce, take a look. Doesn't really look very good actually, but it smells amazing. So good. So we're going to add 2 jars of our barbecue sauce. We're probably going to have this in the next couple of days, so I'll just put this into the fridge. I wouldn't bother making this to go into the freezer because it is so quick to put together. But I could do a couple of things with this. We could have this with buns, which is probably what my kids are going to ask for because that's their favorite, or we could put it in some wraps or on some rice. But either way, I am going to heat some up because I think maybe I'll have some of that with lunch. So we're going to let this cook and simmer so the flavor of the sauce can get into the meat. I might also fry up some onions and some garlic and add that to this as well. There is already onion in the barbecue sauce, but I might add some more. We'll see. My least favorite part of large batch cooking days like this, where I'm using a ton of my own canned goods, is washing all the jars. So far, we have used 15, 16, 17, 18 jars for all this food. So now you can see why I can so much. So I have a couple of things to take care of in the kitchen on top of all the things that we're working on so far. And one of those is getting this is fireweed leaves, and it's been fermenting for, I should have done it for around 3 days, but I think it's been around 6 days. Oh my goodness. So when you first put your leaves, I'll link the video for where we did this, but when you first put the leaves in here and you mix it and you roll them up in your hands, they do smell very green. But as they ferment, they sweeten, and it really does smell very similar to Earl Grey tea, like the bergamot kind of smell, which is my favorite kind of tea. So I really love this. I don't have enough to go into my freeze dryer, I don't think. I'll have to check and see if I have any trays in my freezer to go in the freeze dryer. But I think what I'll probably do is just dehydrate these. So we'll get those on a dehydrating tray. I wanted to give you an update on our oil, or this isn't oil, this is vinegar, on our vinegar. So these are chive flowers, and friends, look at that beautiful color. So we're going to strain this out, and then this vinegar is going to go into the fridge, and I'm going to use it to make salad dressings. We have our kombucha over here, and my finished kombucha over here. So you can see, I'll put it so that there's light behind it. There we go. You can see the difference in color. So after it's fermented, it really lightens up. So I am going to jar up some of our kombucha and add a few frozen berries into our jars here. You can use fruit juice if you like. So this, the purpose of what I'm doing right now is called the second fermentation, and it gives our kombucha, which is just fermented tea, more carbonation. So that is why I'm doing this, and adding the extra fruit gives some extra sugar to that bacteria so that it can produce the gases, which is actually what the bubbles are. I started this kombucha, I don't know, a month or 2 ago, using store-bought kombucha, and I made my own little SCOBY, and I've been making my kombucha out of it ever since. But I have noticed that this particular round of, and I've never had this happen before, of kombucha is not forming a big SCOBY on the top of it. And that is not in any way impacting the actual fermentation of the kombucha, which I just find so weird, because it was always my understanding that the SCOBY was actually the colony of all the bacteria and yeast, and that's what was required in order to ferment the tea. But here, I'll show you. Let me wash my hands. Okay, so you can see here that I have a little bit of like a thicker layer on the top, but it's not like a SCOBY normally is. That's kind of thick and white and gelatinous, and you can scoop it out, put it in a bowl, and then put it back into your fermenting tea. It's just sort of a thicker layer on there. I'm making this sound really gross, but it's not. Trust me, it tastes really good. So what I've been doing is actually just dumping this part out. So see what I mean? There's no big, thick SCOBY on that, but we have lots of bubbles, lots of carbonation happening, and this is Fermented, and I've been using this exact batch without a SCOBY to make my kombucha. And Dan and I both agree that this kombucha that I'm making right now is the best that I have ever made. So I don't know why it's not forming a SCOBY. I don't know why it's still working. All I'm doing to start my fresh batch is taking a couple of cups. Normally I only use 1 cup, but because this doesn't have a SCOBY on it and my new batches aren't having a SCOBY, I'm adding a little bit more. And I am just adding that right into here and then topping this off with cooler water, and it's working perfectly fine. So in all my years of doing this, I have never had this happen before. Maybe it will form a SCOBY later on. Someone left a comment on a video a few weeks ago saying that the SCOBY itself is actually the byproduct of all the bacteria and yeasts that are in the tea and not actually required for fermenting the tea itself, which is obvious in this case since I don't have that. I just don't know why it's not forming. Just think that's so interesting. So anyway, I'm just dumping this right into there. And then I'll top this off with cool water and set it on the counter to go for my next batch. And then this I am going to put into my containers here. So I don't know if you can see the bubbles on the top of that. Super fizzy. Set that aside. Okay, let's get our bread put together now. We're just going to form this into 3 equal sized loaves, give or take. My bread is never entirely equal sized, but it's pretty easy to do, just cutting it into kind of eyeballing the 3 equal pieces and then forming them into loaves. And then I'll pop them on the counter covered up with a moist paper towel, or not paper towel, sorry, moist dish towel, and leave it to rise again for another 45 minutes before we pop it in the oven at 350 degrees for around 30 minutes. And then it's time to get our pie crust all rolled out. So it's been sitting in the fridge for around an hour or so it's nice and chilled. So I'm just gonna roll it out nice and thin. This is gonna be the bottom crust, and then I want to do a lattice top on the top of it. So I just got out my pizza cutter and cut the dough into strips and then did the lattice. My apple pie filling, I actually just can just with water. So I add thickener, I just put it on the stove and add a little bit of cornstarch and water, and it thickens up within a couple of minutes. Then I add it into my pie crust. It's not recommended to can pie filling with cornstarch just for safety reasons. So I do it this way and it works really well. I don't really like making pies, but I do like making fancy tops. It's fun. So now just cutting off the dough around the side of it. So now we're just going to pinch down the edges, and then I am going to put some butter on the top of it and sprinkle a little bit of sugar, and then bake it in the oven at 350 degrees for around 30 minutes until it's nice and golden brown and bubbly. And last up, we have our yogurt. So I've just added a good heaping tablespoon of store-bought yogurt, just plain yogurt, into my quart jars. And I don't like making yogurt in my Instapot. I just don't like the texture of it or really the smell of it, because sometimes it can absorb the smells of some of the other things I've made in my Instapot. So I actually do this in my dehydrator at 110 degrees Fahrenheit for around 12 hours, and it works really well. I like having it in quart jars too, because then I can just open one up at a time as I need it. Okay friends, everything is done cooking. It's actually been done cooking for a long time. It's 2:30 in the afternoon now. It took me about 2 hours or so to get all that food made, which I consider time well spent because I have so many meals here, and I wanted to show you my pie, which I'm very excited about, because you can tell just by looking at that crust how nice and flaky it's going to be, and I am very happy about this. I'm going to make some ice cream and we'll have this for dessert after dinner tonight. I also have all of the bread here, which is all done and ready. I'm just letting it cool off completely. It's still a little bit warm before I put it in bags, and we'll be using that over the next I don't know, 3 or 4 days or so. I would recommend if you're wanting to make several loaves of bread and you're not going to consume it all at once, to slice it and then pop it into the freezer. Make sure you slice it first. It works way better than trying to thaw it and slice it. So we have all that. And then I wanted to show you some of the things that we'll eat on the sides of all these dishes, because we have actually I'll show you these close up too. So we have our beef stew, which is looking good. Our chili over here, our pulled pork over here, which might not look very appetizing, but tastes absolutely delicious with that barbecue or that rhubarb barbecue sauce. With these meals, I'll be making baking powder biscuits or buns, some kind of bread product to go with them. I also have tons of lettuce out in the garden, so we'll be having salads. And then I have lots of different pickled products, pickled vegetables. So this one is jardiniere, which is just a mixed pickle. I also have these pickled carrots here. This is one of our favorite pickled recipes. I also have some pickled coleslaw downstairs, which we'll probably have with our pulled pork, which we usually do. It's one of our favorite things to have both on the sandwich and as a coleslaw on the side. I've shared several times that cooking is not my favorite thing to do, but it is something that I take really seriously because feeding my family good food is important. And I love doing batch cooking days like this, especially when so much of the products are already pre-made in my canning pantry. So as you could see, a lot of these recipes came together really quickly. But I have meals now for days. I could probably get away with not cooking dinner for the next 5 or 6 days if I wanted to, with all of the food that I just made, and that feels really great. And then of course to make a delicious dessert too. I have some leftover crust that I'm just gonna leave in the fridge, and I am probably gonna use that to make some hand pies or something like that for dessert a little bit later on in the week. All right, friends, that is going to be it for me today. I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.